before we start, one note, one parenthesis, which is that this type of exhibition that we are going to talk about today, and this type of research by making an exhibition, is something that is very hard to find a place to do. There is a kind of abyss between what often museums take upon themselves to do when they make exhibitions, with the responsibilities they have to a large audience, to so many stakeholders, and what often galleries do when they think about trying to represent, show their artists, keep up with the program, and showing fresh material in a very, very high-pitched market. The opportunity that happens at Luxembourg Co to make these kinds of exhibitions is really something that's that is very unique, I find, and this is really what we're hoping to open up today. Here is what an unusual trajectory we've been through to find out this aspect of Man Ray's practice and to think about it in terms that seem almost illogical, and I'll explain. This exhibition could have been possibly a dream or a nightmare for Man Ray, and please don't tell me what you think it is, because it really does the thing that maybe an artist wouldn't like someone to do to them, and that is to look at the process and how they go through and how they develop their work over the time, or what basically is under the how does the magician take the rabbit out of the hat. And it's a risky place to be in. But with Man Ray, we really felt there is something extremely interesting to look at when we take some of his most iconic works, things that even people who often don't know anything about art know of, this metronome with the eye that goes tick-tock, or this iron that had a row of nails coming out of it. These became such iconic works, but rarely recognized or identified as a body of work, but usually as a single object. We know of the metronome, we know of the iron, or the mobile with the coat hangers. And to the realization that these things are actually an accumulative practice of decades that includes rethinking of the work, retitling, changing, or making other work that suddenly steals the body of the old work or the title of the old work, we found these beautiful chains of works that we wanted to bring to the fore. Now, the exhibition, due to its style and scale, includes only 5 stories, but in a way they represent the way that Man Ray was thinking, and was thinking through objects in a very original way. And we titled the exhibition Other Objects because the exhibition starts with the other, the idea that there is already something else. And that comes from a very interesting history of objects that for whom we actually, in almost all of the cases of the works that we have in the exhibition, there is a story about some original that was there to begin with, but we actually do not have that original. And what I hope we'll also talk about today partly is that story, or to try to understand how that works, and how that works for an artist to work without the original, or how to be original without necessarily having the first iteration of the work. But without noticing, when we started working on this exhibition, we also had the opportunity of opening up the question we were asking to 5 different writers who came and contributed to the catalog to address and point out what they were seeing in these works. And much thanks to Peter's contribution, we suddenly saw that this exhibition also has a completely second life. And I use the word life because it was your text that suddenly woke us to the fact that these objects behave a bit like subjects, that they have some kind of, that Man Ray was really thinking in a very different way about these objects. So I was hoping that we can start this conversation by unpacking some of the things that come out of this realization, and how that realization that these objects might actually be something more than just dumb things, and how that connects to this notion of Man Ray of remaking an object again and again and again, seemingly as if just doing it again, but actually making the work richer, different, changing, amorphic, and so complex that in the end any object becomes really a body of work. So I'm going to start by stealing an excerpt from your text and reading it out loud because I think it gives a good idea of what we're talking about. While I try to find words to describe a coat hanger, keeping to the principle that observation should come before interpretation, I couldn't help but think about Francis Ponge's book, The Nature of Things, in which he is trying his best to speak for the objects and not speaking about them, avoiding subjective opinions or interpretations, as if they could speak for themselves, as if the object had become subjects. Unfortunately, Ponge never picked a coat hanger unlike Man Ray, who in 1920 found a bunch of them in his studio, left behind by a former tenant. Taking the first coat hanger to hand, Man Ray drilled a hole on each side of it and hung 2 more hangers on each side of it. And I skip a bit forward. Normally, mobiles have some sort of decoration at the end of their hangers, as typically found in children's bedrooms or, trying to make the world a better place, in museum lobbies. In this case, the hangers become their own actors, so no decoration was needed. The hangers were liberated from their duty to carry something else, such as a shirt, and so, in an act of self-assertion, they deny their role as servants. Or as George Baker put it, the hangers hold only more examples of themselves, like a parody of modernist self-reflexivity. So Peter, I wanted to start by asking you, what do you mean that they are denying their role as servants? What are these coat hangers doing?
Well, yes, it's just I was thinking on different categories of objects, and of course certain objects they carry their own meaning, or their right to existence is there. But like a coat hanger, belongs like to this object who is a servant for something else. The coat hanger without a coat makes no sense, or without. So it's you could say in the hierarchy of the object it's lower. Mm. And I found this like really interesting, because normally when we think about this object, you can think about, like, also for Man Ray, this was important, the idea of the fetish. The fetish is mostly what we see in an object, or what we interpret inside of an object. And Francis Ponge, he was a little bit coming from the other angle. He was like really like the object that is becoming a subject, if this is possible. Yeah. And it's this was.
It's funny because so after you said this and I read this, I also started looking into Francis Ponge's poems and finding this. And I was looking for a coat. I found a telephone, I found a table, and all kinds of other things. And then I found also a short text he wrote about a soap, for example.
Yeah.
And how?
Yeah. So then I was how I can make this to a story, and then I reminded like this, which I describe in my text, that like long time ago in the 80s, when I did a road trip, and I ended up, one of the stops was like Memphis, and so we ended up in this Elvis Presley museum, and they were like,
as one does,
and they were, and it was like a little bit like unofficial museum, and we entered the place, and it looked like a thrift store, and they were just like very, very common objects. Like in this case, it would be like this glass, and then a photograph of the glass, and you would be Elvis, and then say, this is the glass that Elvis was drinking the night when he had a talk on Man Ray. So in a way I said, okay, this is like, it's really a nice, between this, the connection of, or how an object can be loaded through this. And there was also a coat hanger that was serving for one of his famous costumes. So
But okay, so this brings, I think, one of the first questions I had, and I've already heard something from you, Francis, on this when we talked earlier, and that's this term objects that we're using here is kind of is kind of unusual, because why don't we talk about sculptures when we talk about Man Ray, but we talk about objects?
I think it's just a simple matter that sculptures traditionally, at least before Man Ray, before Duchamp, were always works that you created by either building up material or taking material away. And you created that three-dimensional object that didn't resemble other ordinary objects that exist in the world. So by creating a new category of ready-mades or objects, you removed it from that, which is the reason I objected to your
Use of sculptures.
Word sculpture 3 times in the first paragraph.
But at least somebody read it.
If someone said it to me, I would have changed those words, because I know that Man Ray would have.
That Man Ray would have.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for him, the terminology was important.
Yes. And for me, it ends up being of critical importance when you talk especially about ready-mades or Man Ray objects. In the book that I did on Duchamp called, it was subtitled The Art of Making Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. In the back of it, I included a glossary so that you would be able to understand the words from the perspective of Duchamp's work. And I just recently reread them, and they don't work for Man Ray quite as well, but one could establish a glossary that would work just as well for Man Ray.
For Man Ray.
Yeah, words count, you you have to use them correctly within our discipline, because otherwise people won't quite get it. If you see the word sculpture enough, that'll confuse them.
Yeah.
So I think you need to always stick to it. Establish a word, use it, and don't change, because we have to teach the world, you see, what we've learned from our artists that we admire.
You mentioned following the principles of description before interpretation in your texts. And in a way, I wonder, you often, this is something I'm just thinking about this right now, that often I've seen press releases and texts about your work that go down to pure description of the objects. Do you find in your work that this terminology or some form of terminology is very essential, for example?
No, I especially think on the work that I did with David Weiss, Fischli Weiss works with the polyurethane objects, but they stand like in a paradox and to what you just mentioned, because these objects, they are like classical, not even sculptures, they are plastic, and because they are carved out of a block. It's not marble, it's polyurethane, but it's like this all, but then they look like objects. I would describe them also as maybe as how will you say in a theater, a prop. Yeah, it's a prop, an attrappe. For our generation to work with this, so we were like turning the wheel backwards, I think Boris Groys wrote a lot about like this kind of paradox, and so like in a game of words, I often was saying they are not ready-made. We have to make them ready. By doing, and they are like, you could say they are fake ready-made or imitating or as if ready-made. However,
interesting, very interesting. And
by doing so, this also it was like they were all done by hand, carved by hand, like in a sentimental way of doing sculpture or art. And it was like all about if you make a copy of this, that like you exclude as much creativity as possible. You just you just have to observe it very carefully. This is why this interpretation, and so you just you observe it very carefully, and you look at the color, you try to copy the color. It's kind of idiotic.
Yeah.
And of course you never you never get there. You always have then there is always a gap, and this gap, be very interested in this gap.
Yeah, and that's where it happens. Or
yeah,
I mean, otherwise, no.
Something
I suppose when we're thinking about exactly the idea of making something again, what is original about making again? Perhaps this gap is one hint of what this could be. It's the difference. Yeah. And I suppose I actually wanted to ask Francis, because I know you know this inside out so well, that if we take one example from the exhibition, we look at, if you've seen the show, the first group of objects we look at is called Object to be Destroyed. And it's the metronome with the eye on it. And this work kind of carries a story behind it that leads Man Ray to tell different stories about how it was made, why it was made. I wonder if you don't mind kind of maybe introducing how that evolves. So we have one example, for example, to talk about. In brief.
He pretty much told the story in his autobiography, but he created it with the idea of creating an object that could tick back and forth, and it would repeat the monotony of painting, the brush stroke back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and just helped him paint. And I loved whoever wrote that text. Was it Jenna who wrote the text on the metronome?
On the metronome, that was David Company.
Oh, David, yeah. He ended it in a wonderful way by saying if you put 5 metronomes together and swing them at different rates, they will eventually collide and tick in unison, which was a nice thought.
We tried it.
Did it work?
No. But maybe we didn't. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he had that idea, and then he put, of course, Lee Miller's eye on it and called it Object to be Destroyed, saying it with one single blow of a hammer you could hit it and destroy it if you wanted. And though I don't know if he ever did that, I don't think he ever did.
But others did.
Said you could.
But others did, according to him.
Yeah, shot at it in 1958 in the exhibition in Paris. No, I don't.
But even within this, he said in 1932, he publishes this short description of the object. Yeah. And he says exactly as you say, that he says, put the eye of someone. He actually provides instructions how to make the work. And he says, put the eye of a loved one who is no longer there, and then let it tick until it reaches maximum capacity and you can't take it anymore, and then break it with a single blow of a hammer. And that feels like one work. But then he says he was painting and used to put the metronome on. And then one day he said an artist needs an audience. So he put an eye on it to look at him painting. And then we learned that Lee Miller was involved. And all these stories, and then the object itself is being reproduced. And once it's called Object to be Destroyed, but then when it's remade, it's suddenly indestructible object. Yes. And then it's remade again, it's called Last Object, and then it's remade again and it's called Perpetual Motif, because I guess he can't get rid of it by that point. And then he changes the eye of Lee Miller to the eye of Juliette Man Ray. So what a life for an artwork to exist and still be considered as one.
Yeah, but why not? It's it's in his studio, it changes over time. His read of it is different. He's no longer obsessed with getting Lee Miller out of his life, so the object itself changes its meaning for him. It makes sense.
But they are also very specific objects, and when Man Ray did this, it was like mass production was kind of young. It was a young thing. And we have to, for thousands and thousands of years, when we had an object, it was always just like we only had that single object. Or even if you needed a chair, the carpenter made you one chair, or maybe he would copy the chair that he already did. But it was relatively young when Duchamp and Man Ray and the ready-made. So I think, and that's also must be really. But the new universe of things, that the object is no more a single thing. And then I found it so nice here to see how he takes things that is mass production, but then each of them has an individuality. So in a way, he goes back and makes them individual. Maybe that's also just like economically that. I mean, I remember when I was a young artist and when we did an edition like of photographs, we just, if we had somebody who wanted to buy the photograph, we made a copy. It was not that we, and when it was an edition of 6, so this means if I look nowadays, like one is a little bit bigger, one is a little bit smaller, another paper. But it was like just not, because it was like this kind, it was not a machine that produced. That's also something then different.
But that's what happens here. Some of the irons, for example, were made, or some of the metronomes were made again and again, each time with a different metronome, with a different iron, with a different this. And then until, I think it's 1965 for the first time that with Daniel Spoeri, there is an edition made of the metronome, which is produced as such, right?
Yeah. What you mentioned about manufactured objects, the interesting thing about them is that they all have a very short existence. You know, you get in your idea, this idea that, okay, now they're going to manufacture shovels and thousands. So the shovel, you'd think in your head would stay the same, but it changes. But every 5 years, it changes so much so that you can't even find the old shovel anymore. That's the reason people are looking for Duchamp's original urinal, which I can't seem to find anywhere.
I know that because when I go to the shop and they want to buy a shirt, I always want to buy the one that I already had. And they said, oh, they're gone. I got it. So,
no. They could always buy 2 shirts if you like it. That's the only way to get away from that.
But let's talk about instructions for a second. This is there is something also here to be said about the fact that Man Ray on several occasions takes on that position of telling people how to do it, or in some cases even so he might even send a photograph to a gallerist across the Atlantic to make the work, because why would he send a work that could be done in the space? Did he care how many are there?
No, I don't think so. I mean, in the end, the iron was an edition of 5,000, which never got produced, but you still see them coming up online, and they're always too much money, in my opinion, because pay $1,500 for something that exists in 5,000 copies. Though, of course, Jeff Koons has now produced things that are worth a lot more than that, and copies of 10,000. So I guess it's all relative. It depends on how you look at it. But I don't think he cared very much, because the idea was, and that's why I provide instructions. Everybody can have one then. Follow the instructions and you can make this thing. You end up, if you want his, then having to seek out that one thing that has his signature or is part of an edition. He forces everybody on that level to become connoisseur. He forces you to become part of the art world if you want the real work of art, as opposed to the one any schmo can make in his basement, which is what those instructions provide.
So I suppose he's provided, but he's doing both. On the one hand, the effect of what he does is that he's actually trying to encourage some kind of a lack of hierarchy. And then on the other hand, what seems to happen is that no matter how he would approach it, in the end, you want to call it the market, finds a way to create a hierarchy of value in there. So the first one is obviously better. Smaller editions obviously more expensive. But this is for an artist who, in a way, just says, he was the one who says art has nothing to do with dates. Ideas are what matters. And in a way, if the idea is what matters, what does it matter if you have the first edition or the last edition? It becomes, I guess, that fetish that you talked about, that becomes kind of really central to the way we understand that history. I don't know.
And also, by doing it, there is like a moment of like sabotaging the idea of it, but then sabotaging the idea of the original.
Yeah.
But interesting way, like this act of sabotage itself becomes a fetish,
Yeah.
So I always, one has to have this in mind,
Yeah.
Sabotaging becoming a fetish.
And I was thinking about your work with instructions, and I just said before this, Alma and I were talking, I said, yeah, of course they have Fischli and Weiss, they have very famous instruction work when you had instructions how to work better. But it's a completely different set of instructions because it's completely abstract in the sense that
And it's also the only work that we did that is, or not, I don't know, one of the only works that's really already made, or like, because we didn't came up with this.
Yeah.
It's like we saw it somewhere in Thailand in a pottery shop and took the photograph, and then we had it in our studio, and after a while we are always looking at this and then just like taking it as a ready-made text, or more like uri poetry.
Yeah.
You
translated the characters and just made them into English or German?
No, it was already in English. It was already in English, and also we took type, how it was, everything was like, it was just like, it was written on a wooden panel, and if it would be like a real ready-made, we would took the wooden panel. So I would say we were only like stealing the content.
But I wish they sued you. Because it would be wonderful, because they're the guys always stealing from us and ripping us off. And you did it the other way around, so congratulations. I didn't know that until now.
But let's take, for example, another work. If we look, for example, at the irons, and again we have a story. There's always a story, and really the original metronome, we don't know where that is, or supposedly doesn't exist. The original iron has a beautiful story in which Man Ray said that in 1921 he had his first solo exhibition in Paris. He's finally among his colleagues in Paris. He's very excited. And when he comes there, he also gets an opportunity to meet Erik Satie, the composer, in person, which drives him out of his own opening to go for a walk with Erik Satie. And they have a drink, and they come back, and on the way back to the gallery, he purchases an iron, and he purchases some tacks for upholstery, and he glues them into the object, and he puts them in the exhibition and makes it part of it, and a few hours later, the object is gone. Now, this story is told us in hindsight later, because this object had no evidence or recollection in any kind of public platform until in 1932, I think, it suddenly appeared as a photograph in a book about surrealism by Herbert Reed. And these stories seem to often be the same with the coat hangers, which are meant to be been made in 1920, was it, or for the first time, and again, a work that doesn't have any evidence to, and the metronome has no evidence to, and how important are these stories to the work?
It depends, how much credibility you want to put into the story, I suppose. Because, they all have a kind of interesting connection to his past. And I didn't think of it till just now, because the coat hanger, his father was a tailor, And in the exhibition of Man Ray at the Jewish Museum, Klein, the guy who organized it, he came up with a wonderful observation that the rope dancer that's in the Museum of Modern Art, Man Ray says in his autobiography, was made from scraps of cut paper on the floor that he picked up and glued onto the wall and turned it into a painting. So he was doing, in effect, what he saw when he came home every night as a kid, because there were tailor's patterns all over the floor. But also the iron, because once you finish a suit, you've got to iron it. And we challenged that whole notion by putting X on it, which makes the iron completely useless. But he also made the coat hanger useless because it's hanging other coat hangers. So it can't anymore. There's no more. So what is art, after all, but a useless object that only certain people take an interest in?
But isn't that interesting? That's what you say in your text, that once you make them useless, you also give them agency.
Yeah, as works of art.
Yeah, or misuse them. Often it's also the misusing. There is a pleasure in misusing them. That's like,
well, he's misusing both those objects. Coat hanger and the iron. He's destroyed their useful purpose.
And the sewing machine that he wraps in felt, and
But the coat hanger is also another aspect in it, like with the iron. I mean, how many you said he would do, like 5,000?
No, at the end of his life, there's an addition. I don't know how.
Yeah, but it could be like just like go on and on.
Oh, yeah.
But then with the coat hanger, even like there is this famous statement of him that if there would be more coat hangers around,
It's for the galaxy.
he would like filling it and so like this idea, and you could feel like the universe, like endless more and more. So even like the object itself could grow, and then you have like this idea of that objects are using space, and that's why he called it also obstruction.
Yeah.
And now there is also like maybe this dream of the artist that your artwork is becoming so big that there is no more space for something else. So he's also playing with that, I think.
Interesting. Can we say something about collaboration? Because I think, okay, I'll start differently. When I thought about this, one of the terms that kept coming up when we were working on this exhibition was identity. But not in the sense that identity is such a beautiful paradox inside it, because identity is the principle according to which something is identical to something else, but identity is also what we use to distinguish something from anything else. And it seems like also there is a real question of that split principle in his work, both in the way that things are done again and again, and they are both identical and split, but also in the way that he starts collaborating with other people. That Daniel Spoeri makes an addition for him, that Marcel Duchamp is involved with some of the works that they are involved into on each other's work, like Rose C'est la vie. And also in some cases, like one of the metronomes that we don't have in this exhibitions, which I'm sure, Francis, you'll have a lot to say about, which contains, instead of an eye or a photograph of an eye, the word think on it and a drawing of an eye, and it is said that this was done over dinner in a collaboration with William Copley. Is that correct? Yeah. And I wonder to what extent then, once the object becomes reproducible, also the agency of who is producing it or the sharing of that thing becomes more possible.
It takes the preciousness away of creating a unique work when someone else you can invite, alter or change it in some way. I guess making objects altogether is an idea of see, where a sculptor makes something, labors over it for 2 years and then shows his piece, that's very different from somebody just buying an object and putting it out there. It's kind of subverting everything from the past. Just saying, look, if I can do this, you can do this. And it's a mistake to think that because Duchamp came up with the notion of a ready-made, everybody can make ready-made objects. That is the conclusion everyone jumps to. But you can't, and he didn't himself. So you have to think of it differently. Duchamp's what he always said was that he hated the idea of repetition. He said it was the equivalent of masturbation. Not that he had anything against him, but he said that just doing the same thing over and over again, he didn't like. But what he didn't like was Picasso, in effect, because Picasso creates an image and then creates another one that's a variation of it, but with enough identity in it that would allow him and his supporting public and clients to see that it's the same artist. That's what he meant by repetition, because Jasper Giles very famously said, I don't know what he was talking about, I don't think Picasso ever repeated himself. But he's thinking of it very differently. He's thinking of Picasso reinventing a form, and Duchamp is saying that the very fact that that form resembles the last form he made is what he meant by repetition. So he hated the idea of repeating himself. Yet, of course, he created his valise, which is, in effect, replicas of all of his most important works, of course, on a smaller scale. But I always thought of that idea of replication being, in effect, the only way you could do something and be original by making it again. Because in effect, you're not doing that variation on a theme anymore. You're just making the object again. It's almost the best comparison I could think of is the only way to avoid a view of the Eiffel Tower in Paris is to go in it. And the only way to avoid replication is to literally replicate it, to do the exact thing again.
It's very interesting. I wonder, yeah, go on.
No, I'm done.
Okay. No, because I just wonder, because you touched on something that made me think of Peter immediately, and that's the distinction you make between the ready-made and the sculptor. And I think actually in your work and in your work with David, you've often, but still today, you kind of, as you tried to point out earlier, you kind of sit in the place that problematizes this. The ready-made or being made, or made to be ready.
Yeah, also one has to see when Man Ray and Duchamp started, they would like place them next to sculptures. So they needed, in a way, for that we realize the difference, you need like the classical sculptures, and this was also like the provocation or irritation that happened. So you need that, of course. You need that, and also the other thing that was really even more needed was the white cube, because the ready-made or these objects, you have to take them out of the real world. Otherwise, it stays what it is. And when you have it even like in the artist studio, maybe that's a little bit a limbo space in between. But otherwise, you need the white cube for making it. To make the transfer from the profane to the so-called holy, if we speak in religious terms, or from mostly all these objects also that they were like in the middle of and also from the tangere to the non-tangere, to that you can't touch them anymore. And especially all these objects that they are here for, the iron, was like, you want to have it in your hand, but then I think if I would take it in my hand, you would cross this. No, so this is like this one way of this transfer.
When Duchamp first showed his ready-mades in 1916 at the Montrose Gallery, they were totally ignored. And he even mentions this in later interviews. And he said they were shown in a closet-like area, so we're thinking he showed the hat rack or something like that, where no one even noticed it. So he knew that you need that, what you just mentioned, the traditional space or the white cube or something to remove it from what it was originally. Mm-hmm. Otherwise a shovel in a hardware store is a shovel. Mm-hmm. You could take Duchamp's shovel and put it in a hardware store, it'd be a shovel again. Mm-hmm. That it were for the signature's everything in Duchamp's case, but you need that context.
But that
doesn't exist. And that's doesn't work. And they knew when he put the urinal in the Independence exhibition, of course, he knew there's the context of traditional art.
Yeah.
But then that context happens also with Man Ray in a different way, with two of the works, for example, we have here, which are the Venus Restored, for example, where it's not so much about getting it out of one context, which is the non-art to the art, or from the art outside of it, but actually taking a work that's considered finding a plaster body of Venus of Medici, and then bringing this object that is at once representative of such an important historical object, on the other hand is a plaster thing that looks a bit like what you'd find in a fashion shop as a mannequin, and then wrapping it and also eventually calling it Venus Restored or Venus Restaurée.
It was also the moment when artwork started to be reproduced, not only like just, not like everyday object, it was like, you could artwork reproduced, and so he turns also this into, he brings it in the world of commodities.
I want to open the floor a little bit to questions if you have them And if not, we'll continue a little bit further as we go. And if something comes up, if anybody has anything, raise. Yeah. No. And we.
Interesting thing about the Venus restaurant, that also the Enigma, they have both been shipped to different places and had the rope cut off then. In both cases, I know. And it's sort of interesting because that means that the customs person who's looking at it didn't get it. And cut it and opened it. And Duchamp's ready-mades have, at least 2 of them have been used for their original function. The one that's at Yale University Art Gallery was used by a janitor in a snowstorm and actually taken outside and used as a shovel. And the door, 11 Rue Larrey, was actually sent to the Biennale in Venice once, and the director said the owner is coming tomorrow, take it out of its box and install it, and they did, in the corner of the room, and repainted the whole thing. So, so it's kind of interesting that it can go back to what it was originally by the wrong person looking at it.
Or by the right person. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
One of the categories in the show that probably, Francis, you'll have more to say about, which Yuval and I invented slightly, which is called monuments, and really looks at the fascination of Man Ray with architecture. And apropos context, I wondered if that's something, I know architecture is very important also for Peter's work, and I wondered what you think about his fascination with architecture and building things.
I don't know if you know about the drawing he did of the buildings falling down. Have you seen that drawing? I think the drawing doesn't exist, but I have a reproduction of it. He did one of skyscrapers lying on the ground with a figure running over the top of it. But the New York sculpture is interesting work, considering the fact that the original does not exist. But an interesting thing happened to me with that sculpture. I think I might have told you about it. I borrowed it for the exhibition that I did, help organize on Man Ray in 1988 with the National Portrait Gallery. And I borrowed it from the owner at the time, but he would not lend it. I didn't know this until after arrest. It was indicated as the original of 1917. But that very same owner let me examine it, and I saw on the inside that there are centimeter marks, which means it must have been used to make the addition. Why in New York would you put centimeter marks on anything? So I knew, of course, that it wasn't. But they used, under my name, you can find this catalog. It's indicated as 1917, which made me furious, of course, because it's under my name. I got nothing out of it. They got to borrow the work. Because that was a condition of it. But apparently he has either changed his mind or isn't living now, because you have the correct date on it over here in the other room. And the extent to which the dates matter, I'm not so certain they would have. Of course, not to Man Ray. He didn't care. At the end of his life, people would always come and approach him for a vintage photograph, and he would very famously say, "I'm not a wine. I'm not a wine. What do you like? What's the vintage for? You don't need the original, whatever it is I have available, that's it." And he very famously, and it's a story told to me by Virginia Zabriskie, who had a gallery right, I don't know if it was this space or next door. But was it on this floor? Was it? Anyway, in the corner somewhere over here, she told me that Man Ray told her that Albert Lewin, the famous film director, who was a good supporter and patron of Man Ray, went to buy a painting of his, Legend, and the painting was written at the bottom. It said 1948, and apparently this, according to Virginia Zabriskie, who, again, remember, got the story from Man Ray. So I don't know how true it is up being in the alley. But she said he came and saw the painting. He said, "Oh, no, I don't want the one from 1948. I want the one from 1915. Where's that?" And he said, oh, come back tomorrow. I'll have it for you. So he comes back the next day. There's the same painting. And then it says 1915. And apparently that's the painting that's now in the LA County Museum up there. So he didn't care about dates. And if someone objected, he found a way to get that guy to Agreed.
The right one.
The date he wanted. He got what he wanted. So.
I haven't seen the whole exhibit, but the metronome and the irons. Personally, I get more of a feeling of art out of them when I see them multiples, like all together. It elevates the object, which is probably what Man Ray did not want. But a singleton is interesting, but it's an object. Whereas when I see them all lined up, I get more from them artistically. And then Francis, I was actually thinking of Picasso, and you brought it up, and here we are in this room. But the genius of Picasso to me is when I see, for example, those images of the bulls all lined up, that is one execution after another, that is powerful to me. So what's going on here? I mean, I guess I'm not buying into Man Ray's philosophy, but this is how I'm feeling. So is there any response?
But the multiple bull's heads, each one of them is a variation and a change. He never drew the same thing.
And they
Twice the same way.
They're wrong. It's
Yeah.
true, but when you see the whole evolution, then it's very powerful. And similarly with the ions, I get more power of them from them when they're all lined up. So is that wrong?
Yeah, what shows you buy? I think it's good for you. You like them both, you're saying. One's powerful, the other is powerful.
But not as a single thing.
Yeah.
It becomes like an object. But I guess that's what he wants, is for it to exist just as one.
Well, he wants
As
it
a
to exist
powerful
as
thing.
one with the knowledge that others exist. You know, that kind of diffuses it.
But they
When
were
you're
all
looking at it,
different, you know.
oh no, those are all different. But when you see one alone in the museum, you're looking at a metronome, and you know that there are other metronomes out there, probably look very similar to the one you're looking at right there. And if you wanted, you could stick an eye on it. You know, that's in the back of his mind. It's not. It's the opposite of Picasso in a way.
Right.
So,
But is it the difference between the single ones that makes it more powerful to you, or if they would be totally identical?
No, it's the difference. I think
oh.
it's the difference in seeing.
but then you're reading
Okay.
Man Ray like Picasso.
Right.
You're looking for the same things in Man Ray that you see and like in Picasso. I think that's fine.
Interesting.
I think it's a mistake, but
But then
Yes.
it's also like pop art that repeating the same objects, like what Warhol did.
Right.
Also, this is also empowering, like the single one, or you could say it's like maybe also making the value less of the single one. It goes in both directions. If you just see like one Brillo box, or if you see all together, then it speaks about like the power of or the needing of the power of the single object. So
Yes.
yeah. So I think it's quite a difference if you like as you mentioned, Picasso and variation. Then you look very carefully at each one, and that's why also the concentration on the individuality is then very strong when you see a very similar one.
Yeah. We have another question.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear from any of you about Man Ray creating additions or revisiting works in the post-war context. And, you mentioned collaborating or working with Daniel Schweri, or thinking about then Fluxus artists and artists like boys or Dieter Roth, who then go on to make what are called multiples. And then you have Galleria Schwartz coming to Man Ray and asking to create editions. Certainly, we could think of that post-war generation as being really influenced by, their sort of forefathers in art history. How much do you think that other direction had an impact maybe on the way in which Man Ray was revisiting these objects or thinking about addition to objects when the concept of the multiple is developing? Is that anything that sort of enters into the thought process or reimagines the work?
Francis, you want to start to say?
I mean, the whole idea of multiples like that isn't right after the war. It's the 1960s, more or less, and Spory came up with this idea because there was always a way to replicate flat two-dimensional objects and very pretty photographs of things, but not three-dimensional objects. And he came up with the idea of three-dimensional objects that move. That was an important part of, like Duchamp's roller reliefs that spun, the Man Ray's metronome that moved back and forth. So they were supposed to be moving three-dimensional objects. They called it map.
Yeah. Multiplication d'art transformé, I think. Yeah.
Anyway, but I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't know the extent to which that fed in, for example, to their minds. Like when Duchamp had the idea of doing ready-mades, it was his idea, really. It wasn't Schwartz's. I always thought he was Schwartz's, but I was wrong. He introduced the idea. And I'm very grateful that he did, because there are now examples of Duchamp's ready-mades that you can see in different parts of the world. Otherwise, it would exist only as pre-productions in his blot or pre-productions in art books, and wouldn't. They speak a very different language, and when they exist in three-dimensional form, and you can walk up to them, other than people. Otherwise, it would be an academic exercise and just remain in books forever. So I'm grateful for that multiples movement that started, and maybe that multiples movement did influence pop art and serial imagery in general in the late 1960s. Not only pop art, but minimal art too. So it could have had that effect. I don't know why it waited so long to exist, because like you pointed out, it was the beginning of the century when things were mechanically produced in multiple forms. And maybe that's sort of interesting, because it happens, it's really the 1890s but cars are on the streets by 1910. So everyone's aware of the machine that created these things in multiple forms. So it's interesting that they start producing these objects that come out of the mechanical world as works of art at roughly the time they become available in those forms.
Also, one has to see it, the ready-made, and how the object entered. This was not coming out of nowhere, because they were like artists before who were bringing real objects. They were like then modified, like the famous Picasso with the chair thing, gluing it on a painting. Or you could say Degas is the inventor of the ready-made.
Picasso's very different.
Because it's like, I mean, I know that it's different, but replacing this, taking a real skirt and put it there. And you could say, okay, then they just left away the ballerina. And you, just to see it,
but there were always things borrowed from the real world to enhance or make and finish another object.
Yeah.
That's really what the still life with chair caning is. Okay.
Yeah.
It's chair caning that becomes a kind of formalist exercise. You're still making a work of art out here, using those objects to make something else. You're not like just taking a shovel and
but like the objects, like they entered.
Oh yeah, they entered at around the same time.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
the collage, in a way. They do.
took the liberty of stealing your Francis Ponge as well. And I thought I'm going to just end with an object we don't have in the exhibition. But I just thought that the way that Ponge was writing about it, in the spirit of what you said, was really suitable. So it's a very short excerpt from a poem that's called Soap. Soap displays at first perfect self-control, though more or less discreetly scented. Then, as soon as one occupies oneself with it, I won't say fire, of course, but what magnificent elan, what utter enthusiasm in the gift of itself, what generosity, what volubility, almost inexhaustible, unimaginable. One may, besides, soon be done with it. Yet this adventure, this brief encounter leaves you, this is what it is, sublime, with hands as clean as you've ever had. And there's something about Pon's way, really, I agree with you so much about thinking about objects that come to take their agency, that is really so Man Ray-like. And this text got me to walk around the show in a way that feels surrounded by these families of objects that are living and looking at us and moving around and have this kind of agency to them. And I think in that sense, going back to the point you've raised here earlier, their power as groups is big because they are, in a way, they are families. They are made in that term of reproduction in a way that almost scarily resembles, our thoughts of reproduction also in human terms and also in other ways of thinking that are not just mechanical. I want to say thank you, a big thank you to both of you for coming and speaking tonight. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. Thank you so much.